Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, November 20th, 2025. Former President George W. Bush says at the funeral service for his Vice President Dick Cheney that Cheney was totally devoted to protecting the United States and its interests. And daughter Liz Cheney says her father knew that the bonds a party must always yield to the single bond we share as Americans. President Trump, in online post, calls for 6 House and Senate Democrats to be arrested, tried, and hanged for, in his words, seditious behavior at the highest level after they urge U.S. military and intelligence community members not to follow unlawful orders. Bureau of Labor Statistics releases the September jobs report 6 weeks late due to the federal government shutdown. It shows 119,000 jobs created and the unemployment rate rising to 4.4%. Vice President JD Vance saying that shows Trump economic policies are actually working. Democratic Congresswoman Sheila McCormack of Florida says the federal charges she's facing for allegedly stealing $5 million in federal disaster aid are unjust, and she looks forward to her day in court. Republican Congressman Greg Steube of Florida is calling for her to be expelled from the House. President Trump meets with former hostages held by Hamas at the White House, plus an update from the White House on the new U.S. peace plan presented to Ukraine to end that country's war with Russia. Associated Press writing Washington National Cathedral on Thursday hosted a bipartisan show of respect and remembrance for Dick Cheney, the consequential and polarizing vice president who in later years became an acidic scold of fellow Republican President Donald Trump. Trump, who has been publicly silent about Cheney's death November 3rd, was not invited to memorial service. 2 ex-presidents came, Republican George W. Bush, who eulogized the man who served him as vice president, and Democrat Joe Biden, who once called Cheney the most dangerous vice president we've had, probably in American history, but now honors his commitment to his family and to his values. Reporting from AP. Former President George W. Bush, in his eulogy, spoke about Dick Cheney's service as a Republican congressman from Wyoming and how his constituents were able to meet with him in small, intimate campaign trail settings.
I wish more Americans got to know Dick Cheney the way the folks in Casper, Cody, and Laramie got to know him. Smart and polished, without airs. Courteous and approachable, seeing everyone as an equal, a gentleman by nature, and a true man of the West. Dick was funny and easygoing in a style that his public image never caught up with. Though we can all agree he wasn't your standard issue politician. If any voters came hoping for a kind word and a hug, they'd have to settle for the kind word. But you can't question the appeal of the only person from America's Mountain West ever elected to national office. On that score, history should record that I chose my vice president not once, but twice. In 2004, he offered to step aside in case I wanted to replace him. I thought about it for a while, but after 4 years of seeing how he treated people, how he carried responsibility, how he handled pressure and took the hits, I arrived back at the conclusion that they do not come any better than Dick Cheney. Colleagues from every chapter of his career will tell you that he lifted the standards of those around him just by being who he was, so focused and so capable. In our years in office together, on the quiet days and on the hardest ones, he was everything a president should expect in his second in command. In moments of testing, Dick Cheney was the model of concentration, alertness, and composure. His memoir was titled My Time. His time produced an old breed of public servant, defined by their substance and character. This was a vice president totally devoted to protecting the United States and its interests. There was never any agenda or angle beyond that. You did not know Dick Cheney unless you understood his greatest concerns and ambitions were for his country.
Former President George W. Bush at the funeral service for former Vice President Dick Cheney today at Washington National Cathedral. More than 1,000 guests were there, including all 4 living vice presidents, Republicans Mike Pence and Dan Quayle, Democrats Kamala Harris and Al Gore, plus Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts and Associate Justice Clarence Thomas, Elena Kagan, and Brett Kavanaugh, and U.S. senators and House members and former cabinet members, both Republicans and Democrats. Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz, a former Republican member of Congress from Wyoming, and like her father, endorsed Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris over Republican nominee Donald Trump in the 2024 election, said of Dick Cheney, country always came before political party.
He'd been at the University of Wyoming just a few weeks when he climbed to a seat up near the rafters of the packed field house to hear President John F. Kennedy urge the students to dedicate their lives to the service of our nation. I think this is the moment my dad decided what direction his life should take. Though he was inspired to service by President Kennedy, Dick Cheney became a Republican. But he knew that bonds of party must always yield to the single bond we share as Americans. For him, a choice between defense of the Constitution and defense of your political party was no choice at all. When he was vice president, he wrote in this letter to all of his grandchildren, "As you grow, you will come to understand the sacrifices that each generation makes to preserve freedom and democracy for future generations. And you will assume the important responsibilities of citizens in our society. I ask of you as my grandchildren what I asked of my daughters, that you always strive in your lives to do what is right."
Liz Cheney at the funeral service for her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, today at Washington National Cathedral. And CBS News writes, 3 of Liz Cheney's children, Elizabeth Perry, Richard Perry, and Grace Perry, recalled memories of watching him cooking the Thanksgiving turkey, driving them to college, going to rodeos, sitting in his chair with books piled high, fishing, and watching John Wayne movies. Their oldest sister not in attendance, and she's about to have a baby. That was from CBS News. And C-SPAN covered the funeral live, and we've got the video at cspan.org, our video library. This is Washington Today. From Newsweek, President Donald Trump demanded the arrest and trial of several, quote, seditious Democratic lawmakers over a video in which they appealed directly to serving military and intelligence personnel to refuse illegal orders and said their actions were punishable by death. He also shared a social media post calling to hang the Democrats. That was from Newsweek. The Democrats in the video were all military and intelligence community veterans. This was posted earlier this week.
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin.
Senator Mark Kelly.
Representative Chris DeLuzio.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander.
Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Congressman Jason Crow.
I was a captain in the United States Navy.
Former CIA officer.
Former Navy.
Former paratrooper and Army Ranger.
Former intelligence officer.
Former Air Force.
We want to speak directly to members of the military
And the intelligence community.
Who take risks each day
To keep Americans safe.
We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now.
Americans trust their military.
But that trust is at risk.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
And intelligence community professionals.
against American citizens.
like us. You all swore an oath.
To protect and defend this Constitution.
And right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad,
But from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
you must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law.
Or our Constitution.
We know this is hard.
And that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
The Army.
Our Navy,
The Air Force.
Your vigilance is critical.
and know that we have your back.
Because now, more than ever,
The American people need you.
We need you to stand up for our laws.
our Constitution,
And who we are as Americans. Don't give up.
don't give up.
don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
A video with House and Senate Democratic lawmakers who are military veterans and veterans of the intelligence community. That was first posted on Tuesday. President Trump posting several times today about it on Truth Social. One read, seditious behavior punishable by death. Washington Post article on this. The video does not specify particular orders that might be unlawful, but some of the lawmakers have relayed this week that they are hearing concerns from service members about the legality of strikes that have targeted people the Trump administration alleges are trafficking narcotics by sea. And on Wednesday, a legal advisor to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth posted a video saying that while the video posted by the Democrats sounded supportive of U.S. troops, the service members could be court-martialed if they refused to follow orders that were found to be legal. That was from the Washington Post. There were questions about all of this at today's White House briefing with the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
Caroline, this morning President Trump accused 6 Democratic lawmakers of seditious behavior punishable by death. Just to be clear, does the president want to execute members of Congress?
No. Let's be clear about what the president is responding to, because many in this room want to talk about the president's response, but not what brought the president to responding in this way. You have sitting members of the United States Congress who conspired together to orchestrate a video message to members of the United States military, to active duty service members, to members of the national security apparatus, encouraging them to defy the president's lawful orders. The sanctity of our military rests on the chain of command. And if that chain of command is broken, it can lead to people getting killed. It can lead to chaos. And that's what these members of Congress who swore an oath to abide by the Constitution are essentially encouraging. We have 1.3 active duty service members in this country. And if they hear this radical message from sitting members of Congress, that could inspire chaos, and it could incite violence, and it certainly could disrupt the chain of command. These 3 members of Congress, I will also add, knew exactly what they were doing. You look at Alyssa Slotkin. She's a former member of the CIA. Mark Kelly was a captain in the U.S. Navy. Maggie Goodlander was a naval officer, and notably, she is also the wife of Joe Biden's national security former advisor, Jake Sullivan. And so these members knew what they were doing. They were leading into their credentials as former members of our military, as veterans, as former members of the national security apparatus to signal to people serving under this commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, that you can defy him and you can betray your oath of office. That is a very, very dangerous message, and it perhaps is punishable by law. I'm not a lawyer. I'll leave that to the Department of Justice and the Department of War to decide.
But the president has frequently, but Caroline, can I just follow up? The president and the vice president, for that matter, have accused the other side of encouraging political violence. Isn't that exactly what the president is doing when he says that members of Congress should be killed?
Why aren't you talking about what these members of Congress are doing to encourage and incite violence? They are literally saying to 1.3 million active duty service members not to defy the chain of command, not to follow lawful orders.
Actually,
every single
you can refuse an illegal order, which
but
is
they're suggesting, Nancy, that the president has given illegal orders, which he has not. Every single order that is given to this United States military by this commander-in-chief and through this chain of command, through the Secretary of War, is lawful. And the courts have proven that. This administration has an unparalleled record at the Supreme Court because we are following the laws. We don't defy court orders. We do things by the books. And to suggest and encourage that active duty service members defy the chain of command is a very dangerous thing for sitting members of Congress to do. And they should be held accountable, and that's what the president wants to see.
The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at her news conference in the White House briefing room, questioned by Nancy Cordes, the CBS News chief White House correspondent. Up on Capitol Hill, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said this about this subject.
Earlier today, Donald Trump shared a post on Truth Social calling for Democratic members of Congress to be hanged. He also posted a message that said, seditious behavior, punishable by death. Let's be crystal clear. The President of the United States is calling for the execution of elected officials. This is an outright threat, and it's deadly serious. We have already seen what happens when Donald Trump tells his followers that his political opponents are enemies of the state. Every time Donald Trump posts things like this, he makes political violence more likely. None of us should tolerate this kind of behavior. We all remember what January 6th was like. We lived through January 6th. We have lived through the assassination and attempted assassinations this year. We have members whose families have had to flee their homes. When Donald Trump uses the language of execution and treason, some of his supporters may very well listen. He is lighting a match in a country soaked with political gasoline. Every senator, every representative, every American, regardless of party, should condemn this immediately and without qualification. Because if we don't draw a line here, there is no line left to draw. Who would have thought the President of the United States saying his opponents should be hanged? It's outrageous. No president has ever stooped as low as Donald Trump. None. He has made political violence a feature of his politics. And if we don't draw a line here, there's no line left to draw.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the minority leader on the Senate floor. And you're listening to Washington Today. CBS News writing that employers across the U.S. added 119,000 jobs in September, marking a pickup after previous employment data had shown a slowdown in hiring. The report marks the first official job tally since the government shutdown ended last week, ending a 6-week blackout on labor data. The unemployment rate rose to 4.4% in September, up from 4.3% in August, and the highest level since October 2021. With robust job growth in September, that suggests more people are re-entering the workforce to search for a job, economists said. That was from CBS News. Vice President JD Vance spoke about the jobs report in an interview with Matt Boyle, Breitbart News Network Washington bureau chief.
Big news this morning is new jobs numbers blew away expectations.
Huge.
From the September numbers, so these were delayed because of the government shutdown, more than double, 119,000 new jobs. And then also there's some interesting stuff in the wages numbers there as well that shows wages on the rise. Your thoughts on the jobs numbers?
Okay, so a huge jobs report, and I assume the market is going crazy right now, probably just opened, because what this shows is that the Trump economic policies are actually working. And you've got 119,000 new jobs. Economists thought that we would have about 50,000 new jobs, but that's actually just the headline number. If you look below the surface, I think the numbers are actually better. So number one, wages continue to way outpace inflation. If you go back to the 3 years of the Biden administration, the average American worker actually lost about $3,000 of take-home pay. In the first 10 months of the Trump economy, we've increased take-home pay by about $1,200, adjusting for inflation. So that's a huge, huge thing, and this jobs report confirms that. You have the number of manufacturing hours worked in the economy is actually going up. You see the private sector is really driving this economic growth and is driving the job creation. And this is really important, I know, to you, Matt, but really to me. And it's that we are seeing the job growth go to native-born American citizens. And what happened under the Biden administration is, to the extent there was any job growth at all, if you looked at the data, almost all of the net job creation in the United States under the Biden administration went to the foreign-born. Now, of course, some of those people are legal immigrants to the United States, but that means that a lot of the job creation was actually going to illegal aliens who shouldn't have been in our country. The best thing that you can say about the Trump economy is that American jobs are going to American workers for a change, and that's the thing that I'm proudest about with these numbers.
Vice President JD Vance today in an interview with Breitbart News. Fox News writing that Thursday's jobs report added to mounting evidence that the U.S. labor market is losing steam. The September report compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that employment in July and August was overstated by 33,000. That was from Fox News. Wall Street today, the Dow down 386, NASDAQ down 486, S&P down 103. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, today introduced what she calls the Economic Dignity for All agenda to address what she says is an affordability crisis in the U.S. She spoke on the House floor.
We know that our families can't afford the basics right now. Their electricity and gas bill is out of control. Their water bills are out of control. And don't get me started about their auto and home insurance. It's all out of control. Grocery costs are up 28%. Healthcare costs are up and out of control. And it's even worse for those family members that are sick. So our families can't afford the basics. Everyone in this chamber can agree to that. So there's an affordability crisis in our country. And the corporations and billionaires driving up these costs don't care. They were not only don't care, they also were rewarded with the big tax breaks and the betrayal bill. So this is why it is important to understand that this is a policy choice. that many of our families feel like they're intentionally being put in a survivor mode instead of being able to thrive. I know that right now nearly 1 in 5 children in Michigan live below the poverty line, Madam Speaker, and 60% Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So I'm not going to wait for President Trump to keep his promise to address the cost of living in our country. I'm going to help and push back and introduce the economic dignity for all agenda, a plan to tackle the high cost of living in our country. We need to ensure that every family, every single corner in our country, a child has resources that they need to live and thrive in our country, not just hope to survive. This plan includes End Child Poverty Act, the Baby Bonus Act, and the Boost Act.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, on the House floor today. Her Boost Act, that stands for Building Our Opportunities to Survive and Thrive, would create a new tax credit for working class individuals and families. Her End Child Poverty Act would replace the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit with the Universal Child Assistance Program. And the Baby Bonus Act would provide a one-time $2,000 payment to families with a newborn baby. The National News Desk writing Trump administration is taking its most decisive steps yet to reduce Washington's influence over U.S. education, according to Department of Education Secretary Liz McMahon. McMahon on Thursday said 6 new interagency partnerships are aimed at streamlining federal bureaucracy and shifting authority back to state agencies, local superintendents, and school boards. The agreements will effectively move billions of dollars in grant programs to other agencies. Most notable is one that would put the Department of Labor over some of the largest federal funding streams for K-12 schools, including Title I money for schools serving low-income communities. That was from the National News Desk. Secretary McMahon joined the White House news conference to talk about these latest steps towards closing the Department of Education.
We have linked 6 groundbreaking partnerships with other federal agencies to delegate education department programs that are redundant with existing programs at Labor, State, Interior, and HHS. These interagency agreements to cut our own bureaucratic bloat are a key step in our efforts to shift educational authority from Washington, D.C. to your state education agency, your local superintendent, your local school board, entities that are accountable to you, and we encourage parents to always be involved. Cutting federal bureaucracy is never a popular move among D.C. insiders. A chorus of anti-Trump voices have come out of the woodwork to complain that we are defunding education, harming students, or acting without a plan. This could not be further from the truth. The majority of Americans across the country handed to President Trump the popular vote precisely because they have seen the brokenness of a top-down education system run by the federal government. They're painfully aware that only 3 out of 10 students can read proficiently at their grade level. They know that college students are collectively $1.7 trillion in debt, and less than half of college graduates get a job that actually uses the degree which they studied so hard to get. They see more teachers than ever before leaving the profession due to burnout, over-regulation, and lack of autonomy in the classroom. Anti-Trump voices are stirring up fear that returning education to the states is a draconian action. When Americans hear that we are shutting down the department, but given no other details, 51% oppose it. But when those same Americans are informed of our plans to preserve important elements of our work in other federal agencies and to maintain the K-12 funding that is distributed to the states, that number flips to an even greater majority at 56%. They support returning education to the states and breaking up the bureaucracy. That's because the Department of Education is a pass-through entity. It doesn't educate a single student. The money it sends to states for education can be sent directly without waste. The Democrats' government shutdown proved that without a doubt, and I'll reiterate what you said, that the Department of Education was not necessary during the shutdown.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon in the White House briefing room, today's news conference, along with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Secretary McMahon also said that negotiations between Trump administration and Harvard University over President Trump's directives and the way the school should be run and a resumption of federal grants is close to being finalized. Reuters writing that concerns about financial market stability, including the potential for a sharp drop in asset prices, are emerging as a fresh theme for Federal Reserve officials as they debate when and even whether to cut interest rates further. In a talk at Georgetown University on Thursday, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook did not offer a view on near-term interest rate policy specifically, but she called out a range of risks to the financial system, including fast-growing private credit markets, hedge fund trading in the Treasury securities market, and the adoption of generative artificial intelligence into machine-based trading. Reporting from Reuters, here's part of her speech on private credit.
The growth in non-bank lending to privately held businesses has increased credit access. As a result, private businesses that have difficulty securing a loan from a bank can continue to grow their businesses with loans from private credit providers. In one of its simplest forms, private credit involves a straightforward intermediation chain. Investors with very long investment horizons and no particular need for liquidity invest in a private credit vehicle such as a private credit fund or a business development company, a BDC, which then extends loans to private businesses. Such investments are usually locked up or ineligible for redemption for 5 to 7 years or even longer. At its best, private credit vehicles conduct due diligence and monitor the loans on behalf of investors. Private credit vehicles tend to have a strong incentive to monitor these loans and can flexibly respond to emerging distress. This careful monitoring is important because private businesses are not subject to the same public scrutiny, auditing, and disclosure standards as their public counterparts. This model has the potential to enhance financial stability and expand economic growth, since it matches longer maturity loans with longer-term funding and allows firms to get the financing they need on favorable terms. Default rates have also been low and returns high.
Federal Reserve Board member Lisa Cook today at Georgetown University. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday on C-SPAN's Ceasefire. At a time when finding common ground matters most in Washington, Florida Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz and Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett come together for a bipartisan dialogue on the Epstein files, health care, and top issues facing the country. They join host Dasha Burns.
Bridging the divide in American politics.
Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, only on C-SPAN.
And if you miss an episode, you can find Ceasefire as a podcast at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A few more headlines. WRC-TV in Washington writes, a federal judge on Thursday ordered the Trump administration to end its months-long deployment of National Guard troops to help police the nation's capital. U.S. District Judge concluded that President Donald Trump's military takeover in Washington, D.C. violates the Constitution and illegally intrudes on local officials' authority to direct law enforcement in the district. She put her order on hold for 21 days to allow for appeal. And the Coast Guard is calling out a Washington Post article about hate symbols. Admiral Kevin Lunday, acting Coast Guard Commandant, said in a statement, the claims that the U.S. Coast Guard will no longer classify swastikas, nooses, or other extremist imagery as prohibited symbols are categorically false. These symbols have been and remain prohibited in the Coast Guard per policy. The Washington Post, citing documents it obtained, said the Coast Guard was planning to label those symbols as potentially divisive. President Trump posted on Truth Social Wednesday night, Communist Mayor of New York City, Zoran Kwame Mandami, has asked for a meeting. We have agreed that this meeting will take place at the Oval Office on Friday, November 21st. Further details to follow. WABC TV in New York writing, President Trump has for months slammed Mamdani, falsely labeling him as a communist and predicting the ruin of his hometown, New York, if the Democratic Socialist was elected. He also threatened to deport Mamdani, who was born in Uganda and became a naturalized American citizen, and to pull federal money from the city. And that was the article from WABC TV. Mayor-elect Mamdani held a news conference today in New York City about his visit to the White House tomorrow.
I will be heading to Washington, D.C. tomorrow to meet with President Trump in the White House. It is customary for an incoming mayor of this city to meet with the White House, given the mutual reliance. It's more critical than ever, given the national crisis of affordability, one that New Yorkers know very well across these 5 boroughs, and the specific challenge many cities are facing with balancing public safety against steps taken by this administration. I know that for tens of thousands of New Yorkers, this meeting is between 2 very different candidates who they voted for the same reason. They wanted a leader who would take on the cost of living crisis that makes it impossible for working people to afford living in this city. My team reached out to the White House to set up this meeting because I will work with anyone to make life more affordable for the more than 8.5 million people who call this city home. I have many disagreements with the president, and I believe that we should be relentless and pursue all avenues and all meetings that could make our city affordable for every single New Yorker. I intend to make it clear to President Trump that I will work with him on any agenda that benefits New Yorkers. If an agenda hurts New Yorkers, I will also be the first to say so. Thank you.
New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, a Democrat, at a news conference in New York City today. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, at her news conference at the White House, was asked about Friday's meeting.
Thank you, Caroline. Is there anything that Mayor-elect Mamdani could say tomorrow that would ease the president's concerns about his future leadership in New York?
Look, I don't want to speak for the president or get ahead of this meeting that we are working on tomorrow. As you saw, the president put out a statement tomorrow that the mayor-elect will be coming to the Oval Office, and so our teams are arranging those details. I won't get into the president's thinking on it. I think you'll all hear from him directly. I also think I will just add, it speaks volumes that tomorrow we have a communist coming to the White House because that's who the Democrat Party elected as the mayor of the largest city in the country. I think it's very telling, but I also think it speaks to the fact that President Trump is willing to meet with anyone and talk to anyone and to try to do what's right on behalf of the American people, whether they live in blue states or red states or blue cities, in a city that's becoming much more left than I think this president ever anticipated in his many years of living in New York himself.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in the White House briefing room. New York Times reporting about Friday's meeting. Mr. Trump has repeatedly attacked Mr. Mamdani and said that his victory would be disastrous for New York, the president's hometown. His advisors tried to meddle in the election to sink Mr. Mamdani, and Mr. Trump made a last-minute endorsement of his main rival, former Governor Andrew M. Cuomo. But in private, Mr. Trump has described Mr. Mamdani as a talented politician, calling him slick and a good talker, according to 2 people who discussed the president's comments on condition of anonymity, reporting from the New York Times. From FloridaPolitics.com, Congressman Greg Steube, a Republican, wants Congress to expel Congresswoman Sheila McCormack, a Democrat, immediately. He announced on social media he will file a privilege resolution on Thursday calling for the move. The Sarasota Republican is pushing the drastic measure a day after a federal grand jury indicted the Miramar Democrat on charges she stole $5 million in COVID funds to finance her 2021 congressional campaign. Steube initially said late Wednesday he wanted to censure McCormack shortly after the Justice Department announced the charges, but he said the following morning he had second thoughts and felt the House should proceed directly to expulsion. That article from FloridaPolitics.com. Congressman Steube spoke today with Fox News.
So if we go back to Santos, which is the most recent situation where this occurred, and before they brought it, they waited for the ethics committee to release their report. I've been told that that is imminent. I don't know how long, but I've been told that at some point that will be coming out. So I will likely wait until the ethics report is released because they have recommendations in there, and then we'll move forward. I'm hopeful that she would just resign before that, and the House doesn't have to go through that exercise. I can't even think that Democrats would support this type of behavior, especially in Florida. My district has been devastated by 6 hurricanes in 2 years. I had constituents who were fighting FEMA and we were opening cases with FEMA to get their reimbursement. So to see the fraud on FEMA in a state like Florida that has been decimated by hurricanes in the past couple of years is really, really frustrating and really aggravating.
Congressman Greg Steube, Republican from Florida, in a Fox News interview on Capitol Hill. Christy Stevenson, spokesperson for House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, put out a statement. Sheila McCormack has proudly represented the people of Palm Beach and Broward counties since 2022, consistent with the United States Constitution. She is entitled to her day in court and the presumption of innocence. Pursuant to the rules of the House Democratic Caucus, Congresswoman Liz McCormack will take leave from her position as ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee's subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa while this matter is ongoing. That was a statement from a spokesperson for the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries. And Jeffries himself was asked about this at a news conference on Capitol Hill.
Mr. Leader, one of your members last night was indicted in Florida for supposedly, allegedly using COVID relief funds from FEMA to bolster her campaign. If the Ethics Committee comes back and corroborates those claims that were made in the indictment, would you expect Congresswoman Liz McCormack to resign?
Sheila is entitled to the presumption of innocence like every other American. She's entitled to her day in court, and she's entitled to a jury of her peers who are going to follow the facts and be guided by the law.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the minority leader at a news conference, and Congresswoman Liz McCormack, Democrat from Florida, spoke to reporters as she returned to her Capitol Hill office.
Your thoughts on the indictment, please?
Well, it's an unjust indictment, and it seems like these intimidation tactics have been pervasive. We spent all week seeing different members getting censured, all in hopes of intimidating and kind of distracting from the Epstein files. And I look forward to my day in court so I can prove myself and actually state the truth. But if this is what Congress is becoming, where they're always trying to intimidate you, scare tactics, especially attacking minorities, black and brown people, then we're going to have to keep fighting for the district. And everybody has been giving me so much support, and we're going to keep fighting until the district gets what it needs, which is fair prices, housing, and fair representation of Congress.
Did so thank you so much.
What's your response to the calls of some of your colleagues to step down or resign?
They didn't elect me. It was my district, and so we'll keep fighting for the people and keep working like we're doing now until they get what they need. So we're here for the people. So the only people who elected me should make that decision. Thank you so much.
Congresswoman Liz McCormack, Democrat from Florida, speaking to reporters as she entered her office on Capitol Hill a day after the federal indictment, $5 million she's accused of stealing FEMA money. Politico writing that the House voted 310 to 103 Wednesday night to send a rebuke of Congressman Corey Mills to the Ethics Committee, a move that now puts larger efforts to censure the Florida Republican on ice. The House Ethics Committee announced earlier in the day, Wednesday, it would form an investigative subpanel to explore whether Mills broke House rules, laws, or other standards in violating campaign finance rules or engaged in sexual misconduct or dating violence, among other issues. That article from Politico. This is Washington Today. Turning to foreign affairs, President Donald Trump met at the White House with 26 freed hostages once held by Hamas. They had met with members of Congress on Wednesday. A video clip of the White House meeting released by the White House Communications Office shows President Trump saying, "You are not hostages anymore. Today, you are heroes." After the meeting, Leo Terrell, senior counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights and head of the Justice Department's Anti-Semitism Task Force, spoke to reporters outside the White House.
The president and the administration showed their love to these hostages who I believe are released primarily due to the work of Donald J. Trump, Jared Kushner, Steve Wyckoff, and the administration. There was happiness in there. There was love. There was tears. And as part of the administration, head of the task force to combat anti-Semitism, I was proud to be part of that historical moment in there.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the hostage families and the hostages said to the president, and what message they had to convey?
Yeah, the first message they said to the president was thank you. They were profusely saying thank you. And I'm telling you that their happiness was sincere, because I think this is why, in my opinion, President Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He accomplished something that no other person on this planet could have done. Brought back those 20 hostages, and all but 3 of the deceased hostages are still held by the savages of Hamas. They will be returned as well.
Leo, we heard President just a clip. He said you were hostages, but today you're heroes. What other message did he relay to the hostages?
Well, I think he gave the message to them. Not only are they heroes, but they're symbols of people who will never quit, surrender. Those hostages were there almost 2 years plus, and they never surrender. And that's why they're heroes. They're role models. Every one of those hostages is a role model because they represent perseverance. And I think they had that perseverance because of the state of Israel and because this administration never backed out. Never backed down. Behind them 100%.
Leo Terrell, senior counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights and head of the Justice Department's Anti-Semitism Task Force, meeting with reporters in the White House driveway as President Trump met in the White House State Dining Room with more than 24 former hostages. New York Post writing today that Israel launched a new wave of airstrikes against Hamas, reportedly killing 27 people after the IDF accused the terror group of testing the military border zone daily, all actions that threaten to undo the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, mediators warned. Again, that was from the Post. To Ukraine and Russia from BBC News, Volodymyr Zelensky will speak to Donald Trump after the U.S. presented Ukraine with a draft peace plan to end the war with Russia. The plan was reportedly drafted by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and his Russian counterpart, Kirill Dmitriev, without Ukraine's involvement. In a statement, Zelensky's office said the U.S. believed the draft plan could help reinvigorate diplomacy and added that Ukraine had agreed to work on the plan's provisions in a way that would bring about a just end to the war. The Ukrainians did not share any details of what the proposal entails, although according to sources quoted by Axios, the Financial Times, and Reuters, it includes plans for Kyiv to give up areas of the Donbass in eastern Ukraine that it still controls, to cut significantly the size of its army, and to forego many of its weapons. That article from BBC News. More on this from the White House Press Secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
In Ukraine, there have been reports that President Zelensky said, he's looking to look at the plan, that there's been reports about the Trump administration proposing a plan. Can you just give an update on where Russia-Ukraine stands, and does the president plan to speak with Zelensky anytime soon, or when can you expect that? So I'm happy to provide an update. I've seen quite a bit of reporting on the latest with Russia-Ukraine, so let me clarify and give you guys the truth on where it currently stands. President Trump has made it very clear since day one, and even on the campaign trail, that he wants to see this war come to an end. He's grown increasingly frustrated with both sides of this war, Russia and Ukraine alike, for their refusal to commit to a peace agreement. But nevertheless, the president and his national security team are steadfast in seeing this war come to an end, to end the killing and deliver on the president's promise. Special Envoy Witkoff, Marco Rubio, have been working on a plan quietly for about the last month. They've been engaging with both sides, Russia and Ukraine, equally to understand what these countries would commit to in order to see a lasting and durable peace. That's how you get to a peace negotiation, right? That's how it worked with Israel, with respect to Israel and Gaza and all of the Arab countries in the Middle East. That's how we accomplished that historic agreement, which the UN, by the way, voted to commit to and accept this week, which was a huge monumental moment. So they have been engaged with both sides, and these talks are continuing. As always, I'm not going to litigate the details of this plan as it's ongoing and it's in flux, but the president supports this plan. It's a good plan for both Russia and Ukraine, and we believe that it should be acceptable to both sides, and we're working very hard to get it done. And I'll also add, I know Secretary Driscoll did meet with President Zelensky today. We spoke with him. He was very optimistic following that meeting. And so, again, we are having good conversations with both sides with respect to ending this war.
In the White House briefing room, the press secretary Caroline Leavitt. European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas was asked at a news conference in Brussels about what's been happening with this U.S. proposal to end the war in Ukraine. It was after a meeting of EU ministers.
Hello, Jorge Liboreiro with Euronews. High Representative, I think today we all have a strong sense of deja vu, no? Because this story, we have seen it before. The United States and Russia, they work on a plan behind everybody's backs. The plan is unacceptable to Ukraine. Europeans are angry. They demand a seat at the table. The media writes that Europe is being sidelined. I mean, you know how that goes. And it's a problem for you, at least for your public perception. What exactly can you do to change this, to ensure that this doesn't happen happen again? Because the stakes at play here are enormous for you, for the European Union. So what do you think you need? You need a new strategy, new approach, new channel of communication? What do you need to do to ensure this doesn't happen and you really have a seat at the table? Thank you.
Well, ministers in the room were quite, solid and I would say calm about this, because we have seen this before, and because different peace plans cannot work if the Europeans and Ukrainians do not agree to this. So that's why we focus today's discussions on what are we doing and what is our course of action. Like I said, we have a 2-point plan. One is to pressure Russia, and today we discussed very intensively how to work on the shadow fleet, because we also had the head of intelligence, European intelligence, in our meeting, giving concrete examples and numbers how the sanctions on Shadow Fleet are really affecting Russian revenues to fund this war. And this is our approach, and that's why we focused on our approach. For any peace plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans to agree.
The European Union Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas at a news conference today in Brussels. An article at RT, a Russian government-funded news site, reads, Ukraine has officially confirmed receiving a draft peace plan from the U.S. The country's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, has expressed hope he'll be able to discuss proposal with U.S. President Donald Trump in the coming days. The announcement came late on Thursday following multiple media reports suggesting that Washington had provided Kyiv with its new 28-point plan to bring the hostilities with Russia to an end. The roadmap reportedly would require Ukraine to withdraw from the parts of the new Russian regions in Donbass that's still under Kyiv's control, cut its armed forces by at least half, surrender some weaponry, and suspend its NATO bid. That was from RT. You're listening to Washington Today. Reuters writing the United States is considering actions such as sanctions and Pentagon engagement on counterterrorism as part of a plan to compel the Nigerian government to better protect Christian communities and religious freedom. A senior U.S. State Department official said on Thursday Nigeria is under scrutiny from U.S. President Donald Trump, who in early November threatened military action over the treatment of Christians in the country. Nigeria says claims that Christians face prosecution misrepresent a complex security situation and do not take into account efforts to safeguard religious freedom. That was from Reuters. Article reporting on a U.S. House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee hearing today about the alleged Christian genocide in Nigeria. One of the witnesses, Jacob McGee, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State with the Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights.
Nigerian officials also continue to prosecute individuals for alleged blasphemy, which stands in clear violation of Nigeria's obligation to safeguard free speech. Under the Sharia penal codes enforced in 12 of its states, Nigeria is one of only 8 countries in the world that allows for penalties up to execution for blasphemy, along with Iran and Pakistan, which have long been designated CPCs. When authorities detain individuals accused of blasphemy, the judicial process often takes years while they remain in prison, sometimes on death row. Mobs often take the law into their own hands with impunity. For example, in 2022, a mob killed Deborah Samuel Yakubu, a student of Shehu Shagari College of Education, Sokoto, in a heinous attack after she was accused of blasphemy. This young Christian woman's life was taken too soon, yet her murderers remain free. With horrifying reports of discrimination, abuse, torture, disappearance, and even the murder of individuals simply trying to practice their faith freely and safely, religious freedom is not an abstraction, but an obligation Nigeria must uphold. This administration has heard the steady, clarion call from civil society and religious actors about the pernicious impact of the violence on religious communities. The Nigerian government must protect religious freedom, strengthen protections of vulnerable Christians, hold perpetrators accountable, and make measurable progress toward ending this violence against Christians, as well as any Nigerians persecuted for their faith.
Jacob McGee, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, testifying at today's House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee hearing. More from the Reuters article on the hearing. A Nigerian delegation is set to meet with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau and officials at the Pentagon, which Trump has renamed the Department of War, while in town this week. Jonathan Pratt, the senior official leading the State Department's Bureau of African Affairs, told the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee on Thursday. That was from Reuters. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. A reminder that C-SPAN's weekly program Ceasefire will be airing Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. And this week, host Dasha Burns sits down with two members of Congress, Florida Democrat Jared Moskowitz and Tennessee Republican Tim Burchett, for a bipartisan dialogue on the Epstein files, health care, and other issues facing the country. C-SPAN Ceasefire, Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN radio and television, and on C-SPAN's free app, C-SPAN Now, also as a podcast. Again, thanks for listening and have a good night.